I knew my weekend was going to be a disaster the moment I saw Brenda Patterson marching up my driveway in her designer snow boots. Her face already twisted into that familiar expression of righteous indignation. It was mid-January in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, and we'd just gotten hammered with nearly 2 feet of snow overnight. The roads were a mess, and the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees. I was loading up my truck for a supply run down to Carson City when I heard her shrill voice cutting through the quiet morning air. Oliver Ingram, I need to speak with you immediately." I sighed and set down the duffel bag I'd been tossing into my truck bed. Brenda was the HOA president of Pine Ridge Estates, our gated community tucked into the mountains about 3 miles from the lake. She'd held the position for 6 years and wielded her power like a medieval tyrant with a clipboard. Every interaction with her felt like stepping into a courtroom where you were already guilty. "Morning, Brenda," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" She stopped about 5 feet from me, her breath forming little clouds in the freezing air. She was wearing a puffy white jacket that made her look like the Michelin Man, and her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it gave her headaches. Everything about Brenda screamed control freak, from her perfectly manicured nails to the way she always carried her HOA binder like it was the Constitution itself. "I saw you have tire chains in your truck bed," she said, pointing at the tangled metal chains I'd laid out the night before. "I need to borrow them," I blinked. "Excuse me, the chains. I need to borrow them. My vehicle requires chains to get down the mountain safely, and I have an important HOA meeting in Incline Village this afternoon." I looked at my chains, then back at her. "Brenda, these are my only set. I'm heading down to Carson City right now, and the highway patrol isn't letting anyone through without chains or 4-wheel drive with winter tires." "I'm aware of the regulations," she snapped, "but this is an emergency. HOA business takes precedence." "Precedence over what?" "My own errands." Her eyes narrowed. "Oliver, as a resident of Pine Ridge Estates, you're required to cooperate with HOA officers when community matters are at stake. It's in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the bylaws." I'd lived in this community for 3 years, and I'd read those bylaws cover to cover when I bought my house. There was nothing in there about surrendering personal property to HOA board members. "Brenda, that's not what that section says. It talks about granting access to property for inspections and maintenance, not loaning out personal items." "Don't argue semantics with me," she said, her voice rising. "I am the HOA president, and I'm telling you I need those chains. You can wait until tomorrow to go to Carson City." "No, I can't. I have a client meeting at 2, and I need to pick up materials for a job that starts Monday morning." I ran a custom furniture business from my home workshop, and this particular client had already rescheduled twice. Missing this meeting would probably cost me a $5,000 commission. Brenda crossed her arms. "Then I suppose you'll have to explain to the board why you prioritized personal profit over community service. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about your attitude." There it was. The threat. Brenda's favorite tool. She'd used the same tactic on half the neighborhood over the years. Threatened someone with HOA violations, fines, or board hearings until they caved to whatever unreasonable demand she was making that week. "Brenda, you can't have my chains. But I'd be happy to help you install yours if you bought a set." "I don't have time to drive to the auto parts store. The meeting starts at 2:30. There's a Big O Tires in Incline Village. You could stop there on your way." Her face was turning red now, which was impressive considering how cold it was. "This is absolutely unacceptable. I will be filing a formal complaint with the board. Your lack of community spirit is noted, Mr. Ingram." She turned and stomped back toward her house, which was 4 doors down from mine. I watched her go, feeling that familiar mix of frustration and disbelief that came with every Brenda encounter. I finished loading my truck and climbed in. The chains went in last, and I made sure they were secure. As I pulled out of my driveway, I saw Brenda's silver Lexus SUV backing out of her garage. She decided to make the trip without chains, apparently. Either that or she'd bullied some other poor neighbor into surrendering theirs. The drive down Highway 431 was treacherous. Even with my chains on and 4-wheel drive engaged, my truck slipped and slid on the icy curves. The highway patrol had checkpoints set up at the base of the mountain, turning back anyone without proper equipment. I made it through and continued on to Carson City, grateful for my chains with every mile. The client meeting went well. Frank Morrison loved the designs I'd brought for his home office built-ins, and we signed a contract right there in his living room. The materials pickup took longer than expected, and by the time I loaded the last sheet of walnut into my truck bed, it was nearly 5:30. The sun was already setting, and the temperature was dropping fast. My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the afternoon, but I'd silenced it during the meeting and forgotten to check it. When I finally looked at the screen, I had 17 text messages and 6 missed calls, all from my neighbors. The first text was from Doug Chen, who lived directly across the street from me. "Hey man, you might want to avoid coming home for a while. Brenda is on a warpath. She's threatening to fine everyone who didn't help her today." The next few messages were similar warnings. But then I got to a text from Sarah Phillips, who lived next door to Brenda. "OMG Oliver, you have to see this. Brenda tried to drive down the mountain without chains and slid off the road. Her car is stuck in a ditch near mile marker 12. Tow truck can't get to her until morning. She's losing it." There was a photo attached. I zoomed in and couldn't help the laugh that escaped. Brenda's Lexus was nose down in a snowy ditch, the back wheels suspended in the air. Even better, there were tire chains wrapped around the rear axle in a twisted, mangled mess. I called Sarah. She picked up on the first ring. "Please tell me you saw the photo," she said, barely containing her laughter. I did. "What happened?" "So after you left, Brenda went to Tom Fletcher's house and basically forced him to loan her his chains. Tom's like 75 and just wanted her to leave him alone, so he gave them to her. But here's the thing, Brenda had no idea how to install them." "Oh no." "Oh yes. She spent like 45 minutes in her driveway trying to figure it out. I watched from my window. She had the instructions, but she kept getting confused and angry. She was yelling at the chains, Oliver, literally yelling at inanimate objects. I was grinning now despite myself. Then what? Then she gave up on doing it properly and just kind of wrapped them around the tires. I don't think she actually secured them correctly. She drove off, and I guess she made it about halfway down the mountain before they came loose. According to the highway patrol report that everyone's talking about, the chains wrapped around her axle while she was driving, locked up her rear wheels, and she lost control on a curve. Is she okay? She's fine. Pissed off beyond belief, but physically fine. The tow truck driver told someone at the general store that the chains are completely destroyed, and they damaged her axle too. It's going to cost her like $3,000 to fix. Wow. And here's the best part. She's been calling everyone in the neighborhood demanding that someone come pick her up. She's still sitting in her car waiting because everyone keeps making excuses. It's 15 degrees out there, Oliver. I probably should have felt bad for her. But after 3 years of Brenda's tyranny, of watching her fine people for having the wrong shade of beige curtains or leaving their trash cans out 6 minutes past the pickup time, I felt a profound sense of karmic justice. "Where exactly is she?" I asked. "Mile marker 12, like the text said." "Why, just curious." I thanked Sarah for the update and hung up. Mile marker 12 was on my route home. I had to pass it anyway. As I drove back up the mountain, chains crunching reassuringly beneath my tires, I thought about Brenda sitting in her broken Lexus in the freezing cold. The very chains she'd been so desperate to borrow now mangled around her axle. Sure enough, when I reached mile marker 12, there was the Lexus, exactly as it appeared in the photo. The highway patrol had put flares out around it, and there was a small reflective sign warning other drivers. I slowed down as I passed and caught a glimpse of Brenda in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. She saw my truck. Our eyes met for just a moment through her window. I didn't wave or gesture. I just kept driving. In my rearview mirror, I saw her door open and she stumbled out into the snow, waving her arms. I couldn't hear her over my engine, but I could imagine what she was shouting. I kept driving. Part of me felt guilty about that. Part of me knew it was petty. But a larger part of me remembered the time Brenda had threatened to foreclose on elderly Mrs. Robinson's house because her lawn was a quarter-inch too tall during a heat wave. Or when she'd fined Dave Martinez $200 because his son's basketball hoop was 3 inches over the property line. Or the countless other small cruelties she'd inflicted on people who were just trying to live their lives in peace. I made it home around 7:30. My driveway was a sheet of ice, and it took some careful maneuvering to get my truck into the garage. As I was unloading my materials, Doug came across the street with 2 beers. "You passed her, didn't you?" he asked, handing me a bottle. "I did. Did you stop?" "Nope." He nodded slowly, taking a sip of his beer. "Good. She called my house 3 times demanding I come get her. On the last call, she actually threatened to fine me if I didn't comply, like she has some HOA regulation that requires members to provide taxi service." "What did you say?" I told her I'd had 3 beers and couldn't legally drive, which was true at the time. We stood in my garage, drinking our beers and watching the snow begin to fall again. More neighbors started appearing. Sarah came over, then Tom Fletcher, then the Harrises from the corner house. Before long, there were about a dozen of us gathered in my driveway, all sharing stories about Brenda's reign of terror. Tom was still upset about giving her his chains. She told me I could be held liable if she got in an accident without proper equipment. Said something about community responsibility and legal exposure. I knew it was garbage, but she just kept pushing. "Those chains cost me $60, he added. "They're probably destroyed now." "I'll replace them," I said. "I should have warned you she'd probably come to you after I turned her down." "Not your fault, Oliver. We all know how Brenda operates." The conversation eventually turned to the bigger picture. It wasn't just Brenda's personality that was the problem. It was the way she ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom. She'd stacked the board with her friends, all of whom rubber-stamped whatever she wanted. She'd pushed through ridiculous rules and charged excessive fines for minor violations. She'd used HOA funds for questionable purposes, like the time she'd hired her cousin's landscaping company at twice the market rate to plant flowers at the community entrance. "We need to vote her out," Sarah said. "The annual election is in April. We should organize." There were murmurs of agreement, but also hesitation. Brenda had won the last 3 elections unopposed because anyone who considered running suddenly found themselves drowning in violation notices and fines. It was intimidation, plain and simple, but proving it was another matter. "Count me in," I said. "I'll run if no one else wants to. Doug raised his beer. "I'll back you. It's time someone stood up to her." We talked for another hour, working out the basics of a plan. We'd need to gather support quietly, document all of Brenda's overreaches, and prepare for the inevitable retaliation. It felt good to finally be taking action instead of just complaining. Around 9, everyone headed home. I was in my kitchen making dinner when I heard a vehicle pull up outside. Through my window, I saw a tow truck with Brenda's Lexus on the flatbed. A pickup truck followed behind it, and Brenda climbed out of the passenger seat. She looked rough. Her perfect hair was a mess, her makeup was smeared, and she was moving stiffly from the cold. The tow truck driver unloaded her Lexus in her driveway and left. Brenda stood there for a moment, staring at the damaged undercarriage of her vehicle. Then she turned and looked directly at my house. I stepped back from the window, not wanting her to see me watching. But I had a feeling this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, signed by Brenda Patterson. I opened it standing right there at the mailbox, snow crunching under my boots. Notice of violation. Property: 847 Pinecrest Drive. Owner: Oliver Ingram. Violation: unauthorized commercial activity. On January 18th, resident was observed loading commercial materials into vehicle on property premises. Per HOA Bylaws Section 19, Paragraph 3, commercial activities including but not limited to material storage and vehicle loading for business purposes are prohibited. Fine: $500. Payment due within 15 days. I read it 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I'd been running my furniture business from my home workshop for 3 years. Brenda knew about it. The HOA board knew about it. They'd never said a word because there was nothing in the bylaws that actually prohibited it. Section 19. Paragraph 3 dealt with running retail businesses from residential properties, like opening a store in your garage. It had nothing to do with loading materials into your truck. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah. "Did you get a letter today?" "Oh my God, yes. She fined me $300 for having my trash cans visible from the street." "Oliver, my trash cans are in the same place they've been for 8 years. Suddenly it's a violation." She's going after everyone who didn't help her yesterday. Doug got a letter too, something about his lawn furniture being the wrong color. It's insane. Over the next few hours, I learned that Brenda had sent violation notices to 8 different households, all people who'd been in my driveway the night before. The violations ranged from absurd to completely fabricated. She was using the HOA's authority to punish people for her own embarrassment. I spent that afternoon digging through the HOA bylaws, cross-referencing every violation she'd cited. Not a single one was legitimate. They were all either misinterpretations of the rules or outright lies. I documented everything in a spreadsheet, including photos and dates. On Monday morning, I requested an emergency board meeting. According to the bylaws, any homeowner could request a hearing to contest a violation within 10 days of receiving notice. I submitted my request in writing, with copies to all 5 board members. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center. I spent the next 3 days preparing my case, printing documents, and coordinating with the other affected homeowners. We all planned to attend and contest our violations together. Thursday came, and the community center was packed. Word had spread about the mass violations, and even residents who hadn't been fined showed up to watch. The energy in the room was electric. People were angry. Brenda had finally pushed too far. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Brenda was in the center, flanked by her allies. Patricia Murphy, a stern woman in her 60s who wore pearls even to casual meetings. Greg Sanders, a nervous accountant who rarely spoke. Linda Zhao, who owned the local real estate office and benefited from staying on Brenda's good side. And James Foster, a retired engineer who seemed perpetually confused about what was happening around him. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. We're here to address several violation contests. We'll hear each case individually. Oliver Ingram, you're first. I stood and walked to the podium set up in front of the board table. I dressed professionally, wearing slacks and a button-down shirt. I wanted to look serious, credible. Thank you for hearing my contest. I received a violation notice claiming I engaged in prohibited commercial activity by loading materials into my truck. The notice cites Section 19, Paragraph 3 of the bylaws. However, that section specifically addresses retail businesses operated from residential properties. I'm not running a retail business. I'm a craftsman who occasionally loads materials and finished pieces into my vehicle. This is no different from a lawyer bringing work home or a salesman loading samples. Brenda cut me off. You run a commercial enterprise from your property. That's clear-cut. The bylaws specifically allow home-based businesses that don't involve customers visiting the property or external signage. I've checked. Multiple residents in this community work from home. Are you going to fine everyone who uses their computer for work? Patricia Murphy leaned forward. Mr. Ingram, the board has discretion in interpreting violations. We've determined your activity crosses the line. Based on what standard? I've been running this business for 3 years without issue. Why is it suddenly a problem? Silence. Brenda shuffled papers, not meeting my eyes. I'd like to submit evidence, I continued, placing a folder on the table. This contains the full text of Section 19, Paragraph 3, along with the HOA's own guidance document on home-based businesses from 2019. According to this guidance, which was approved by the board, my activities are explicitly permitted. Greg Sanders actually picked up the folder and started reading. His eyes widened slightly. Brenda, this does seem to indicate that what he's describing is allowed. I don't recall that guidance document, Brenda said quickly. It's in the HOA archives, I replied. I pulled it myself on Tuesday. It's signed by you and the rest of the 2019 board. Linda Zhao was looking uncomfortable now. Perhaps we should review this matter more carefully. I move that we table this violation pending review, James Foster said, speaking up for the first time. Brenda's face was flushed. We don't need to table anything. The violation stands. Actually, I said, according to the bylaws, if the board can't reach a majority decision at the hearing, the violation is automatically dismissed. I'd like to call for a vote. This was the key moment. I'd studied the bylaws obsessively. Brenda ruled through intimidation, but the actual rules limited her power. She needed 3 votes out of 5 to uphold the violation. All in favor of upholding the violation, Brenda said tersely. She raised her hand. Patricia raised hers. That was it. Greg, Linda, and James all kept their hands down. The violation is dismissed, I said. Thank you for your time. I could see the fury in Brenda's eyes as I returned to my seat. The room was buzzing with whispers. This was unprecedented. Brenda never lost. Doug was up next, contesting his lawn furniture violation. He'd brought paint swatches and photos proving his furniture matched the HOA's approved color palette exactly. The board dismissed his violation 3-2. Sarah followed, demonstrating that her trash cans were in the exact location specified by the HOA's own placement guidelines. Dismissed, 3-2, one by one, every contested violation was dismissed. The other board members were clearly uncomfortable with Brenda's overreach. They might have been her allies generally, but they weren't willing to uphold blatantly false violations in front of a room full of angry homeowners. By the time we finished the last case, Brenda looked like she was ready to explode. She adjourned the meeting without another word and stormed out of the community center, Patricia trailing behind her. The victory felt good, but I knew it was temporary. Brenda wasn't going to let this go. Sure enough, on Saturday morning, I found her in my driveway taking photos of my truck. She was crouched down near the rear wheel, her phone out, snapping pictures from multiple angles. "Can I help you, Brenda?" I called from my front door. She stood up, not looking the least bit embarrassed about being caught. "I'm documenting a leak. Your vehicle is dripping fluid onto the common area driveway approach. That's an environmental violation." I walked out and looked where she was pointing. There was indeed a tiny drop of condensation from my truck's exhaust system, normal for cold weather. "That's water vapor, Brenda. It's frozen. The board will determine what it is. I'm documenting it." "While you're documenting things, maybe you should document the damage you did to Tom Fletcher's tire chains. He'd like to be reimbursed." Her expression hardened. "Tom loaned those chains voluntarily. Any damage occurred due to improper installation on my part, which makes it my responsibility, not the HOA's. He can send me an invoice." I was actually surprised she admitted fault. "So you'll pay him back?" I said. "He can send me an invoice. I didn't say I'd pay it." "He failed to provide proper instructions for installation. That's contributory negligence." There it was. The classic Brenda move. Never take responsibility if you can find some way to blame someone else. "Tom handed you the chains with an instruction manual included. Sarah watched you ignore the instructions and wrap them incorrectly." I don't recall Sarah being appointed as an official witness to anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other properties to inspect. She walked off toward Doug's house, phone still out, clearly looking for more violations to document. This went on for weeks. Brenda became obsessed with finding legitimate violations she could cite against those of us who'd opposed her. She walked the neighborhood daily with her phone and her binder, photographing anything that might possibly be construed as a rule violation. My trash can was 6 inches too close to the street. Doug's house numbers were a 1/4 inch too small per the approved font size. Sarah's mailbox post had a tiny chip in the paint. She submitted formal violations for all of these petty issues, and each time we had to request hearings and contest them. The other board members were getting tired of it. At the 3rd emergency meeting in February, Linda Zhao actually snapped at Brenda. "This is ridiculous. We're wasting everyone's time with these trivial complaints. This is not what the HOA is supposed to be doing." "The rules exist for a reason," Brenda shot back. "If we don't enforce them consistently, we lose our authority." "There's a difference between enforcement and harassment," Greg Sanders said quietly. "This is starting to feel like harassment." Brenda slammed her hand on the table. "I am the president of this HOA. I decide what constitutes appropriate enforcement. If you have a problem with my leadership, you're welcome to resign from the board." That threat had always worked before, but Linda surprised everyone by saying, "Maybe I will." The room went silent. Linda was a founding member of the board. She'd served for 9 years. Her resignation would be a huge blow to Brenda's control. "Let's all calm down," Patricia said, trying to smooth things over. "We're on the same team here." But the cracks were showing. Brenda's grip on power was weakening. In March, things escalated. I was in my workshop late one evening, working on a cabinet for Frank Morrison's office, when I heard glass breaking. I rushed outside to find my truck's rear window shattered. There was a rock on the seat surrounded by broken glass. I called the police immediately. The Washoe County Sheriff's deputy who responded took photos and a report. There were no witnesses, no cameras in my area of the neighborhood. He said there'd been a few incidents of vandalism in the area recently, probably kids, but I had a feeling it wasn't kids. 2 days later, Doug's mailbox was knocked over. The following week, someone slashed Sarah's tires. Tom Fletcher found his garden gnomes smashed in his driveway. The pattern was obvious. Every victim was someone who'd opposed Brenda at the board meeting. We couldn't prove it was her, of course. She was too smart to be caught on camera, but everyone knew. The neighborhood was buzzing with accusations and speculation. I started parking my truck in my garage and installed security cameras around my property. Other affected neighbors did the same. Doug's camera actually caught something a week later. A figure in dark clothing approaching his property around 2 in the morning. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify who it was, but the person was approximately Brenda's height and build. Doug shared the footage with the sheriff's department, but they said it wasn't enough for charges. They needed something more concrete. The April election was approaching fast. I'd officially filed to run for HOA president, and Sarah had filed for one of the open board positions. We'd been quietly campaigning, talking to neighbors, explaining our vision for a more reasonable HOA that focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. Brenda was running for re-election, of course. Her campaign strategy seemed to be doubling down on strict rule enforcement and warning that the neighborhood would descend into chaos if the radicals took over. She sent out a mass email to all residents claiming that I wanted to eliminate all HOA rules and let people paint their houses neon colors and park RVs in their front yards. None of that was true. My platform was simple. Enforce rules that actually matter, treat homeowners with respect, and use HOA funds responsibly. Apparently, that qualified as radical. The election was scheduled for the first Saturday in April. It would be a simple vote at the annual meeting. All homeowners in good standing could vote in person. The week before the election, Brenda sent out violation notices to 17 different households. 17. All for minor, technical violations. A door wreath that was 2 inches larger than the approved size. A garden hose visible from the street. A car parked in a driveway for more than 24 hours without being moved. The intent was clear. She was trying to put people in not good standing status so they couldn't vote. According to the bylaws, residents with unpaid violations couldn't vote in elections until they'd paid their fines or had their violations dismissed through a hearing. But she'd made a critical mistake. The bylaws also stated that violation hearings had to be held at least 5 business days before any vote could be effected. There wasn't enough time to process all 17 violations before the election. We pointed this out in a group letter to the board, citing the specific bylaw section. Linda Zhao responded personally, confirming that all 17 residents would be eligible to vote regardless of the pending violations. Brenda was furious, but she couldn't override the bylaws, especially with other board members watching. The day of the annual meeting arrived. The community center was more packed than I'd ever seen it. Every chair was filled, and people were standing along the walls. There were probably 120 residents present out of our community's 150 households. Brenda called the meeting to order and immediately tried to rush through the preliminary business so we could get to the election. But Doug raised a point of order. Before we proceed with the election, I'd like to raise a concern about HOA fund management. I've reviewed the financial reports from the past 2 years, and there are some irregularities I believe the community should be aware of. Brenda's face went pale. That's not on the agenda. According to Bylaws Section 8, any member can raise financial concerns at the annual meeting. I'm exercising that right. Doug walked to the front and distributed photocopied documents to everyone in the room. I'd helped him prepare this. We'd spent hours going through the HOA's financial records, which were technically public, but that Brenda made very difficult to access. In 2024, the HOA paid $83,000 to Summit Landscaping for community maintenance. That's 40% higher than the previous year. Summit Landscaping is owned by Richard Patterson, who is Brenda's husband. The room erupted in whispers. Brenda stood up. That's completely above board. Richard's company submitted the lowest bid. Actually, Doug continued, I obtained bids from 3 other landscaping companies for equivalent services. All of them came in between $55,000 and $62,000. Summit Landscaping was the most expensive bid, not the least. You have no right to question approved contracts, Patricia Murphy interjected. I have every right as a paying member of this HOA. There's more. In January of this year, the HOA paid $12,000 to Elite Consulting Services for community planning services. I called Elite Consulting. They have no record of any work performed for Pine Ridge Estates. Brenda was gripping the edge of the table. That must be an administrative error on their part. I spoke to the owner directly. He was very clear. His company has never done business with us. But interestingly, Elite Consulting shares an address with a Patricia Murphy. That's you, isn't it, Patricia? Patricia stood up, her face red. This is an ambush. This is highly inappropriate. What's inappropriate is board members funneling HOA funds to their own businesses, Sarah called out from the audience. The room was in chaos now. People were shouting questions. Others were flipping through Doug's documents. James Foster looked genuinely shocked, like he'd had no idea any of this was happening. Greg Sanders had his head in his hands. Brenda was yelling for order, banging her gavel repeatedly. This meeting is not about baseless accusations. We will proceed with the election. I move for an independent audit of all HOA finances, someone shouted from the back. Second, multiple voices called out. We need a vote on the motion, Doug said calmly. Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse, but she couldn't, not with this many witnesses. Fine. All in favor of wasting HOA money on an unnecessary audit. The overwhelming majority of hands went up. Motion passes, Doug announced. Now we vote, Brenda said tersely. She was trying to regain control, but her authority had crumbled in a matter of minutes. The election was done by paper ballot. We had to vote for president and for 2 board positions. As ballots were distributed, I watched Brenda whispering urgently with Patricia. They both looked panicked. Counting took about 30 minutes. Linda Zhao and James Foster handled the count, with Sarah observing to ensure fairness. The room was silent except for the rustling of paper. Finally, Linda stood up with the results. For the position of HOA president, Brenda Patterson received 32 votes. Oliver Ingram received 94 votes. Oliver Ingram is the new president. The room erupted in applause. I felt a wave of relief and anxiety wash over me simultaneously. I'd won, but now I actually had to fix this mess. For board positions, Linda continued, Sarah Phillips received 87 votes and Tom Fletcher received 82 votes. They will fill the 2 open seats. More applause. Brenda and Patricia had both been voted out. Greg Sanders kept his seat since he wasn't up for re-election this year, as did Linda and James. Brenda stood up, grabbed her binder and walked out without a word. Patricia followed her. The door slammed behind them. The The rest of the meeting was actually productive. We discussed real issues: snow removal, community center maintenance, plans for the summer landscaping. It felt like a weight had been lifted off the entire neighborhood. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to congratulate me and thank me for running. Tom was beaming. "I can't believe I'm on the board. Me. I just wanted my gnomes to stop getting smashed." "Your gnomes are safe now," I assured him. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the new board to get the HOA back on track. We hired a forensic accountant to audit the books. The results were worse than we'd expected. Over the past 6 years, Brenda and Patricia had embezzled nearly $200,000 from HOA funds through fake contracts, inflated invoices, and outright theft. We filed a police report. The Washoe County Sheriff's Department opened an investigation. By late May, they had enough evidence to file charges. I was in my workshop on a Tuesday afternoon when I saw the police cars pull up to Brenda's house. 2 deputies knocked on her door. I watched from my window as they spoke with her on her porch. She was shaking her head, gesturing angrily. Then one of the deputies showed her a document and her shoulders slumped. They arrested her right there. Handcuffs and everything. A crowd of neighbors had gathered on the street, watching in silence as Brenda was put in the back of the patrol car. Patricia Murphy was arrested the same day at her office. The charges included embezzlement, fraud, and filing false documents. The district attorney was taking it seriously because of the amount involved and the number of victims. Richard Patterson, Brenda's husband, was also charged for his role in the landscaping fraud. He'd knowingly inflated invoices and split the excess payments with Brenda. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Brenda tried to claim the charges were retaliation for her strict enforcement of HOA rules. Her lawyer argued that the whole case was a vendetta by disgruntled homeowners, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, invoices that didn't match actual work performed. The forensic accountant's report was damning. There was no way to spin this as anything other than theft. In September, Brenda took a plea deal. She pled guilty to felony embezzlement and agreed to pay full restitution plus penalties. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. Patricia got 3 years. Richard got 2 years plus probation. The restitution payments, combined with our HOA insurance coverage for board member malfeasance, meant we recovered most of the stolen money. We used it to repave the community roads, upgrade the community center, and build up our reserve fund to proper levels. Life in Pine Ridge Estates improved dramatically. Without Brenda's reign of terror, people actually started enjoying their homes again. The new board focused on meaningful improvements rather than petty violations. We updated the bylaws to include better financial oversight and term limits for board positions. Tom Fletcher replaced his garden gnomes with even more elaborate ones. Nobody complained. Doug painted his lawn furniture a brighter shade of green. Still within the approved palette, but closer to the edge. Sarah put up a decorative mailbox that was definitely outside the old specifications. We amended the rules to allow for reasonable personalization. As for me, I served 1 term as HOA president and didn't run for re-election. I'd done what I set out to do: remove a tyrant and restore sanity to our community. Sarah took over as president after my term, and she's been excellent. I still run my furniture business from my workshop. No one bothers me about loading materials into my truck anymore. In fact, the new board hired me to build custom benches for the community center. It felt good to contribute something positive. I never did get an apology from Brenda. Before she reported to prison, She sent a bitter email to the entire community blaming everyone else for her downfall. She claimed she was the victim, that we'd ganged up on her, that she'd only been trying to maintain property values. Not a single person responded. Sometimes I drive past mile marker 12 on Highway 431, and I think about that January night when Brenda's poorly installed tire chains wrapped around her axle. It was such a small thing, really. A moment of incompetence born from stubbornness and pride. But it set off a chain reaction that exposed years of corruption and abuse. If she'd just bought her own chains, or asked politely to borrow mine, and accepted my no with grace, none of this might have come to light. She might still be running the HOA, still embezzling funds, still making everyone's lives miserable, but she couldn't help herself. She had to push. She had to retaliate. She had to prove she was in control, and that's what ultimately brought her down. The tire chains were really just a symbol. A symbol of someone who demanded what wasn't hers, who refused to take responsibility, who wrapped herself in rules and authority while breaking the most fundamental rule of all. Don't steal from the people you're supposed to serve. I kept my chains, by the way. They're in my garage, neatly coiled and ready for the next snow. I replaced Tom's chains as promised and bought better ones that were easier to install. He learned how to put them on properly, and so did several other neighbors after I held an informal workshop in my driveway one Saturday. We were prepared when the next big storm hit in December. The whole community was ready. Chains installed correctly, supplies stocked up, neighbors checking on each other. That's what an HOA should be. Not a weapon wielded by a petty tyrant, but a tool for bringing a community together. These days, when I drive through Pine Ridge estates, I see people outside talking to their neighbors. Kids playing in yards without fear of violation notices. Houses with personality and character within reasonable guidelines. It feels like a real neighborhood now, not a prison camp. And every time I pass Brenda's old house, which was sold to a lovely young couple from Sacramento, I'm reminded that justice sometimes comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes it comes from standing up to a bully. Sometimes it comes from doing the hard work of documentation and organization. And sometimes, just sometimes, it comes from simply saying no when someone demands your tire chains and watching them wrap their own chains around their own axle, literally and figuratively. The couple who bought Brenda's house knocked on my door a few weeks after they moved in. They'd heard stories about the previous owner and wanted to make sure they didn't accidentally violate any rules. I assured them that as long as they weren't embezzling HOA funds, they'd probably be fine. They laughed, but I could tell they were genuinely nervous. That was Brenda's lasting legacy. A community traumatized by years of petty tyranny. It would take time to heal fully, but we were healing. Month by month, the anxiety faded. People stopped obsessively checking their mailboxes for violation notices. They stopped measuring their lawn furniture and counting the hours their trash cans were visible. In the spring, we held the first annual Pine Ridge Estates community barbecue. Nearly every household showed up. We grilled burgers and hot dogs. Kids ran around playing, and people actually seemed happy to be part of the community. Tom Fletcher gave a little speech thanking everyone for standing together against corruption. He held up his new tire chains like a trophy. "These chains represent freedom," he declared with mock solemnity. "Freedom from tyranny, freedom from unjust fines, and freedom to drive safely in the snow." Everyone cheered. It was silly and over the top, but it felt good. We'd been through something together and come out stronger. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up paper plates and plastic cups, Sarah came over and handed me a beer. "You know," she said, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually glad Brenda demanded your chains that day. Really? Yeah, I mean, obviously what she did was wrong. But if that hadn't happened, if she hadn't gone off the rails with all those retaliatory violations, we might never have looked into the finances. She could have kept stealing for years. She had a point. Sometimes the worst actions of bad people are what finally expose them. Plus, Sarah continued, watching her wrap those chains around her own axle was the most perfect metaphor I've ever seen in real life. She literally sabotaged herself through her own incompetence and stubbornness. We clinked our beer bottles together, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The legal proceedings continued for months after Brenda's sentencing. There were civil suits from homeowners seeking damages for emotional distress and wrongful fines. The HOA's insurance company got involved. Lawyers made a lot of money. In the end, most of the homeowners who'd been excessively fined over the years received settlements. It wasn't much, a few $100s each, but it was acknowledgement that what had happened to them was wrong. Doug used his settlement money to buy a new mailbox with an elaborate post that absolutely would have violated Brenda's interpretation of the rules. It had decorative lanterns and a little copper roof. It was beautiful. The board approved it unanimously. I used mine to buy premium snow tires for my truck. I figured I'd earned the right to drive safely, chains or no chains. The vandalism stopped completely after Brenda was arrested, which pretty much confirmed everyone's suspicions about who'd been behind it. The sheriff's department never formally charged her with those crimes. There wasn't enough evidence, but we all knew. As my term as HOA president wound down, I made sure to document everything we'd done to reform the organization. Updated bylaws with clear financial oversight. Term limits for all positions. Transparent budgeting. A streamlined process for contesting violations that didn't require hiring a lawyer. Most importantly, we established a principle. The HOA serves the homeowners, not the other way around. Rules exist to protect property values and maintain a pleasant community, not to give board members power trips. Sarah's been a great president. She's organized community events, negotiated better rates for snow removal services, and even got a local internet provider to upgrade our infrastructure. Under her leadership, the HOA has become something people actually appreciate rather than resent. I stayed on the board as treasurer for a year after my presidency ended, just to make sure the financial reforms stuck. Then I stepped down completely. I'd done my part. It was time to let others lead. These days, I focus on my furniture business. It's grown significantly. Turns out, not spending all your time fighting with your HOA leaves more time for actual work. Frank Morrison referred me to several of his friends, and I've built pieces for homes all over the Lake Tahoe area. I even got commissioned to build a conference table for a law office in Reno. When the partners asked if I could guarantee timely delivery, I told them about my previous experience with HOA management and community organization. They were impressed. Apparently, dealing with Brenda Patterson was better job training than an MBA. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Seasons changed. Snow came and went. The chains stayed in my garage, ready when needed but not a source of neighborhood drama. One cold afternoon in January, almost exactly 2 years after the tire chain incident, I was in my workshop sanding a cherry wood dresser when someone knocked on my side door. It was a woman I didn't recognize, probably in her early 30s, professional looking. Mr. Ingram. I'm Jennifer Patterson. It took me a moment to place the name. Brenda's daughter. Yes, do you have a few minutes? I invited her into my workshop. She looked around at the various pieces in progress, the wood shavings on the floor, the smell of sawdust and varnish. "This is nice," she said. "You do beautiful work." "Thank you. What can I do for you?" She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize for my mother's behavior. I know that doesn't change anything, and I know you don't owe me any kind of forgiveness, but I felt like someone from our family should say it. What she did was wrong, all of it." I studied her face. She looked genuinely uncomfortable but also determined. "Did she ask you to come here?" "God, no. She doesn't even know I'm here. She's still in complete denial about everything. She thinks she's the victim, that everyone else is to blame." Jennifer shook her head. "I tried talking to her about it when I visited her in prison. She won't listen. She can't accept that she did anything wrong." "I appreciate you coming," I said. "It takes courage to apologize for someone else's actions." I grew up watching her run that HOA like it was her personal kingdom. I thought it was normal. It wasn't until I moved away and lived in other communities that I realized how abnormal it all was. She was a bully, a thief, and I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. We talked for a while. Jennifer told me about growing up in Pine Ridge Estates, about always walking on eggshells because her mother was constantly angry about some neighbor's violation or some challenge to her authority. She'd moved to Portland 5 years ago for work and to get away from the toxic environment. "When I heard about the arrest, part of me was relieved," she admitted. "Does that make me a terrible daughter?" "It makes you honest. Your mother's actions hurt a lot of people. You're allowed to acknowledge that." Before she left, Jennifer asked if the community was doing better now. I told her about Sarah's presidency, about the reforms we'd implemented, about the barbecue, and the sense of actual community that had developed. "That's good," she said. "That's how it should have been all along." After she left, I thought about Brenda sitting in prison, still convinced she'd done nothing wrong. Some people never learn. Some people can't admit fault even when the evidence is overwhelming and the consequences are severe. The tire chains thing really had been the perfect metaphor. She'd wrapped herself so tightly in her own rigid thinking, her own need for control, that she'd locked up her own wheels and crashed. And unlike a car, which can be towed and repaired, a reputation and a life built on bullying and theft can't be so easily fixed. I finished the dresser that afternoon as snow began to fall outside. By evening, there was a fresh coating of white covering everything. My truck was in the garage, chains cleaned and ready if needed. But the roads were manageable, and I had nowhere I needed to be. I made dinner, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat by my fireplace. Through my window, I could see lights on in houses up and down the street, smoke rising from chimneys, the soft glow of a community at peace. It had been a long journey from that January morning when Brenda marched up my driveway demanding my chains. So much had changed. A tyrant had fallen. Stolen money had been recovered. A community had come together and remembered what it meant to be neighbors rather than subjects. And all because I'd said no to an unreasonable demand. All because I'd stood my ground when it would have been easier to just give in. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance have the biggest consequences. Sometimes refusing to surrender your tire chains leads to exposing corruption, reforming a broken system, and helping an entire community find its voice. I raised my glass to the window, to the neighborhood beyond, to everyone who'd stood up when it mattered. "To chains," I said quietly. "May they always be properly installed." The fire crackled. Snow continued to fall. And in a prison 100 miles away, Brenda Patterson sat in her cell, probably still convinced that everyone else was wrong and she was the only one who tried to do things right. But here, in Pine Ridge Estates, we knew better. We'd lived through her reign and survived it. We'd built something better in its place, and that was the real victory. Not just removing a bad leader, but creating a good community. Not just avoiding chains wrapped around axles, but learning to work together, to respect boundaries, to treat each other with basic human decency. The next morning, I woke to find 18 inches of fresh snow. The community's new snow removal service, hired at a reasonable rate through competitive bidding, was already clearing the roads. I could hear the plow making its rounds. I made coffee and checked my email. There was a message from the new HOA board about an upcoming meeting to discuss summer landscaping plans. The tone was friendly, informative. No threats, no demands, just an invitation to participate if I was interested. That's what it should be. That's what it was now. I put on my boots and went outside to clear my driveway. Tom Fletcher was doing the same across the street. We waved to each other. Doug came out with his snowblower and helped several neighbors with their driveways without being asked. This was community. This was what Brenda never understood. You can't force people to cooperate through intimidation and fines. You have to actually care about them, actually want what's best for everyone, actually treat people like they matter. The chains stayed in my garage that day. The roads were clear enough, and I didn't need to go anywhere. But knowing they were there, properly maintained and ready when needed, gave me a sense of security. Just like knowing we had a properly functioning HOA with checks and balances and accountability gave the whole neighborhood a sense of security. We'd learned our lessons. We'd paid attention to the warning signs. We'd taken action when it mattered, and we'd never let anyone like Brenda Patterson take control again. The sun broke through the clouds around noon, turning the snow-covered landscape into a brilliant white wonderland. Kids came out to build snowmen. Someone organized an impromptu sledding party at the hill near the community center. I grabbed my sled from the garage and joined them. Why not? Life was good. The tyrant was gone. The community was thriving. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could picture Brenda's Lexus in that ditch. Chains wrapped around the axle. A perfect monument to the consequences of demanding what isn't yours and refusing to take responsibility for your own actions. Justice, I'd learned, sometimes comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes it arrives with tire chains and twisted metal. Sometimes it comes from forensic accountants and determined neighbors. Sometimes it's swift, and sometimes it takes years. But it comes. Eventually, if you stand up for what's right and refuse to back down, it comes. I sledded down that hill a dozen times that afternoon, laughing like a kid, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends through our shared struggle and victory. And every time I climbed back up, I thought about how far we'd come, from a community living in fear of violation notices to this. People playing in the snow, helping each other, actually enjoying the place they lived. That was worth fighting for. That was worth standing up to a bully and saying no. That was worth keeping your tire chains when someone demands them, even if it means watching them wrap their own chains around their own axle. Because sometimes, the best way to help someone is to let them face the consequences of their own actions. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable their behavior. Brenda demanded my chains. I said no. And in doing so, I helped free an entire community from hers. That's a trade I'd make any day.